On the morning of August 31, 2003, the lifeless body of 22-year-old Katie Sepich was found near a remote landfill in Las Cruces, New Mexico. She was last seen by friends leaving a house party. It took almost 4 years for her murderer to be identified. Katie was described by her mother as an open, cheerful, and intelligent person. She grew up in Carlsbad, New Mexico, and was the oldest child in the family. Katie graduated from New Mexico State University with a degree in business administration and was about to attend graduate school for business administration. She worked as a waitress at a local Mexican restaurant. Katie was a very outgoing person. During her studies, she met a man named Joe Biscoff. The friendly relationship between the two quickly developed into something romantic. Katie told her mother, Jane, that she was happy with Joe. She wanted to build a future with him, and a few months later her dream came true when Joe gave her a diamond ring. In the summer of 2003, as Katie and Joe were finishing their studies, they encountered difficulties in their relationship. Katie decided to continue her studies, and Joe moved back to his parents' house in Gallup, New Mexico, a small town about 350 miles from Las Cruces. Katie was very upset that Joe had to leave her. The long-distance relationship was unbearable, but they still saw each other occasionally. In 2003, on Labor Day weekend, Joe came to Las Cruces and Katie was overjoyed. But the weekend they spent together ended tragically. On Saturday, August 3, 2003, Katie enjoyed herself with Joe and her friends, moving from one bar to another before arriving at a local party where she disappeared. The next day, Katie's mother, Jane, received a call that changed her life forever. Veronica, Katie's roommate, told Jane that her daughter had left the party alone that night. Veronica and Joe were sleeping in the house where the party was being held. They thought Katie had gone home, but in the morning it turned out that she was nowhere to be found. Her family contacted the police and reported her missing. At about the same time, someone discovered the body of a woman who was wearing almost no clothes near a landfill in the desert. There were no documents next to the body, but after seeing external signs, the police concluded that the body had not been there for more than a day. It was immediately clear that the victim's death was not due to an accident. She appeared to be about 20 to 25 years old. She was naked below the waist, so the motive for the crime was obvious. Her hands showed signs of self-defense. She had fought for her life by scratching the attacker. Under her fingernails were particles of the perpetrator's skin, so the police had a DNA sample of the perpetrator who had taken her life. There were strangulation marks on her neck, which at first glance were the most likely cause of death. The investigators could not find any signs of a struggle near the body, which led them to conclude that she had died in another location. Apparently, the perpetrator had brought the body to this remote desert landfill in the hope that it would take a long time before it was found. Something else shocking was found on the victim's body: burn marks on her arms and back. This suggested that the perpetrator had tried to dispose of the body or destroy evidence by attempting to set the victim on fire. The police quickly established a connection between Kate's disappearance and the discovery of the body. The father traveled to the morgue to identify the body. The residents of the once peaceful Las Cruces were horrified by what had happened to Katie. The police were doing everything they could to find the perpetrator as quickly as possible because there was no guarantee that this man would not commit another crime. When the police began investigating Katie's case, they wanted to find out as much as possible about the last hours of her life, where and with whom she had been, what she had done, whether she had argued with anyone, and whether she had any enemies. The distance between the location where the party was held and the house where Katie lived was about a mile, so the police had to find out whether she had made it to her house or not. First, the investigators spoke with Veronica, her roommate, and Joe, her boyfriend. They found it strange that the two had stayed at the party and Katie had gone home alone in the middle of the night. Joe showed no willingness to cooperate with the police. He said Katie had left her purse, her phone, and her keys behind. The investigators began to investigate Katie's route. They went from door to door and interviewed the residents in the hope of getting clues from them, but unfortunately that didn't help. No one had seen or heard anything. The rumor spread that Katie had made it to her house but had never gone inside because she didn't have her keys with her. The investigators searched the house and the surrounding area and found the shoes under her bedroom window. Apparently, she wanted to get into the house through the window, whereupon someone attacked her. The footprints on the gravel near the house also indicated this. Kat fought for her life, but unfortunately the perpetrator was stronger. The investigators suspected that after taking Katie's life, the perpetrator took her to a landfill in the desert and tried to set her on fire. They began to wonder whether it was a stranger or someone she knew and trusted. There were about 40 people at the party. Maybe someone followed Katie when she went home and attacked her. Could that person have been her boyfriend? The investigators wanted to find answers to these questions. They interviewed all the attendees of the party and discovered an important detail that Joe had not mentioned. Several witnesses reported that Katie saw Joe kissing another woman. Later, they saw the couple arguing. For this reason, Katie went home alone and forgot her purse. She was angry and wanted to leave the place as quickly as possible. However, when the police questioned Joe for the first time, he said nothing about it. He also said nothing to her parents, who wanted to know why their daughter had left the party alone. The investigators questioned Joe again. They told him that they knew that he and she had argued because she had seen him kissing another woman. Joe admitted that this was true. When Katie went home, he followed her in his car. Allegedly, Joe drove to her house but didn't go inside. He saw that the light in her room was off and thought she was sleeping, so he went back to the party. So it turns out that Joe wasn't at the party when Katie was attacked. No one who the investigators questioned could say for sure when Joe came back. He probably had time to commit the crime, then take Katie's lifeless body to the desert and return to the party. When the investigators questioned those who attended the event, they discovered another strange detail. At the party, Joe started calling Katie on her cell phone, which was in her purse. When the ringing sounded, the man saw the phone and realized that Kat had forgotten it. But for some reason, he kept calling her until morning. Maybe he wanted to create an alibi in this way and show that he was worried about his girlfriend. The investigators wanted an explanation from Joe for his strange behavior, but he refused to talk. Katie loved Joe very much, but he didn't even attend her funeral, which aroused even more suspicion. All the investigators needed to rule out Joe as a possible suspect was a DNA sample from him. The forensic scientists found DNA samples in 3 different places on Katie's body. Most of them were under her fingernails. All the samples found belonged to the same person. The police wanted to compare Joe's DNA with the DNA found on Katie's body, but there was a problem. Joe left town and his parents hired a lawyer who reported that Joe refused to give his DNA sample. If you look at the man's behavior, there is no doubt that he has something to hide and that he has something to do with Katie's death. The police had to find a legal way to get his DNA, but that took time. In the meantime, the investigators followed other leads. They investigated similar cases and tried to find out whether Kat was the only victim of the man who took her life. The DNA samples found on her body were compared with a national database, but there were no matches. The investigators decided to return to the place where it all began, the party. They identified all the men at that party and asked them to give DNA samples. All the men agreed because they had nothing to hide. However, no matches with their DNA were found on Katie's body, and that brought the investigators back to Joe. He was the only one who refused to make his DNA available. the investigators found another way to get it. They found out that Katie and Joe had spent some time in her bedroom before the party, where they had intimate contact. The police went to the house and pulled the sheet off Katie's bed, assuming that they would find Joe's DNA there, and they were right. The lab actually found a male DNA sample, but it didn't match the one found on Katie's body. That means that Joe wasn't the one who attacked her. Why then did he refuse to cooperate with the police, if he had something to do with the incident with his girlfriend? The police sent the test results to Joe's lawyer. After learning that he had been removed from the list of suspects, Joe decided to contact the police and give a DNA sample of himself. The new test confirmed the original result that Joe was not involved in the crime. When asked for an explanation for his refusal to cooperate with the police, Joe said that he and Katie had intimate contact before the party, so he was afraid that they would find his DNA on her body. Joe's behavior on the night of Katie's death remained a mystery to the police and her family. After Joe was ruled out as a suspect, the police had to look for other leads. Several people at the party told the investigators that Katie was wearing rings on her fingers that night, including the one Joe had given her. However, when Katie's body was discovered, there were no rings on her fingers. The police believed that the rings had been removed by the person who killed her. They searched all the pawnshops in the area but never found Katie's jewelry. Another possible clue was a tire track near the place where Katie's body was found. The forensic scientists were able to identify the make and model of the tires. The manufacturer told the police that these tires were usually used on pickups. Unfortunately, that didn't bring them any closer to the perpetrator, and the case stalled. About a year later, someone in Wisconsin committed a very similar crime to the one involving Cott. Someone attacked a woman in Green Bay and did the same thing to her. The victim was also set on fire but luckily survived. She told the police that she pretended to be dead and that was the only reason she survived. When the perpetrators were gone, she put out the fire and went to a neighbor's house for help. She said she was attacked by 2 Hispanic men. But in Katie's case, all the evidence pointed to only one person. The police had to carry out DNA tests to confirm or rule out a connection between the 2 crimes. The victim from Wisconsin described in detail to the police the appearance of the men who had attacked her. When the police in Green Bay published the pictures, one of the farmers recognized his workers Gregorio Morales and Juan Nieto in the pictures. One of the 2 had relatives in Las Cruces and often visited them. Both men were arrested. The police investigating the Katie case believed they had finally found the perpetrators. However, the results of the DNA tests proved the opposite. The samples did not match the DNA found on Katie's body. The 2 men were later convicted of assaulting the woman in Green Bay but had nothing to do with the Kate case. Nieto was sentenced to 70 years in prison, Morales to 50 years. This once again brought the investigators to a dead end. The only evidence the police had was tire tracks from the crime scene and DNA samples from the perpetrator. Katie's family had hoped that the police would be able to identify the man who took their daughter's life with the help of DNA tests, but there were problems. It was illegal to take a DNA sample from a person arrested by the police. On December 18, 2006, 3.5 years after Katie's death, there was a breakthrough in the case. The lab discovered a DNA sample that matched the DNA found on Katie's body. The man who attacked Katie was 26-year-old Gabriel Adrian Avila. He didn't know Katie but had an extensive criminal record and had been released from prison shortly before Katie's death. On November 13, 2003, less than 3 months after the brutal murder of Katie, Avila was arrested for breaking into the apartment of 2 young women with a knife. The residents escaped the attack by locking themselves in the bathroom and calling the emergency number. In March 2004, he was convicted of aggravated assault. However, the files show that Avila fled after being released on bail. He could have been arrested as early as 3 months after the attack on Katie, but due to a faulty system, his connection to Katie's death was only established 3.5 years later. The fugitive escaped the police for almost a year before being arrested in November 2004 on the basis of a tip. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison. When he was admitted to prison, Avila was given a DNA sample, but it took another 2 years to analyze it. When the results showed a partial match with the DNA from the location of Katie's body, the investigators became active and quickly found the truck in which Avila had disposed of the body. They found a ring that belonged to Katie on the center console. This case showed that the system had to be changed. The police spent 3 years of resources and time searching for the perpetrator, but Avila could have been arrested much earlier if he had been given a DNA sample when he was first arrested. It is also surprising that his DNA sample was not tested until 2 years later in 2006. The investigators in the Katie case visited the prison to speak with Avila. When he saw Katie's ring, which was found in his pickup, he admitted to committing the crime. He said he was in the area that evening to buy illegal substances while his wife was not at home. At that moment, he saw Katie and asked her if she needed a ride. She replied that this was not the case. He then saw her again in front of the house. Katie tried to get into her bedroom through the window, but Avila attacked her and began to undress her. After that, he didn't know what to do and decided to strangle Katie because he feared that she would later identify him. Then he loaded Katie's body into his pickup and drove it to a junkyard in the desert where he laid it on the ground. He assumed that burning the body would destroy all the evidence, but he was wrong. A sample of Avila's DNA was taken again and there was a match. When DNA traces were found on Katie's body in 2003, her parents hoped that this would lead to a quick resolution, but in New Mexico and in almost all other federal states, it was illegal to carry out DNA tests at the time of the arrest. The DNA was only entered into the system when a person was convicted and put in prison. This triggered a nationwide campaign led by Katie's parents and demanding a law named after their daughter in all 50 federal states. The law stipulated that anyone arrested for a violent crime must submit a DNA sample, which is then entered into the National Cody database. In 2006, the bill was passed by the legislature of New Mexico with only 5 votes against and came into force in March 2006. Thanks to the tireless efforts of Katie's parents, the law became federal law in 2010. Meanwhile, there is a similar law in more than 31 federal states as in New Mexico. David, Katie's father, said his greatest fear was that someone else would die at the hand of his daughter's murderer, but now he can put that fear to rest. Opponents argue that the procedure constitutes an invasion of privacy and a violation of civil rights. Others point out that DNA differs from fingerprints in that it contains sensitive genetic information. In the case, a federal district court confirmed that a federal law that allows samples to be taken and entered into a national DNA database before a conviction does not violate constitutional rights. The trial against Gabriel Adrian Avila began in 2007. He apologized to Katie's family, and his lawyer urged the judge to show leniency as Avila repents his actions. District Attorney Suzanne Martinez, however, argued that Avila waited more than 3 years after the murder to make his confession and only made it after the investigators presented him with evidence. At the sentencing, Katie's father David urged the judge not to be lenient with the sentence. In May 2007, Gabriel Adrian Avila was found guilty and sentenced to 69 years in prison. He will be released on parole in 2043 after serving a 30-year sentence. Jane, Katie's mother, promised that she and her husband would continue to work to ensure that Katie's law is passed in all 50 states in order to commemorate her daughter. Thanks for watching and take care.